I had lived in this apartment for a total of 3 years. For the first year and a half, I had lived there with my ex-husband. My best friend found the apartment for me. Her sister was breaking her lease and was looking for someone to take it over. I was desperate to move out of my husband's mom's house and for us to finally have our own place. And so we decided to take the lease. We divorced about 1.5 years after having moved in. While my ex lived there, nothing much happened, except for one thing neither of us could explain. The apartment was on the 2nd floor, and as soon as you walked into the apartment, on your right was the kitchen, which was open to the living room. As you walked past the living room, you'd enter a long hallway which was about 20 feet long. On the left wall of this hallway were 3 doors, 2 leading to 2 bedrooms, and the last door on the left was the bathroom. At the very end of the hallway was a final door that led to the laundry room. My ex had a gaming computer situated in the living room. I used the spare bedroom as an art studio, and I had my own little desk in there with a laptop to watch YouTube while working on projects. My ex taught me proper computer etiquette, and so I always made sure I shut my computer down and didn't just leave it on constantly. My ex had 2 cats, and anyone who's had a cat knows they love to jump up onto surfaces and cause trouble. So to avoid this, I always kept my studio door closed when I wasn't in there. One night, I remember waking to what sounded like my ex's gaming computer playing some sort of video. I assumed maybe one of the cats had jumped onto his modem and accidentally turned it on. In and out of grogginess, I brushed it off and just drifted back to sleep. However, upon my ex having woken up for work early in the morning, I realized it had been my laptop that had been turned on, because I realized he was going into my studio to turn it off. I immediately felt a ping of anxiety go through my chest because I really had no idea how that computer could possibly be on, and on top of that playing a YouTube video. First of all, you needed to enter a passcode for the computer. Secondly, I know for a fact that I had turned my computer off as I always remembered to. And finally, my studio door had been closed for hours before we headed off to bed. If I had by chance left my laptop on, loudly playing YouTube videos, we would have heard it before drifting off to sleep, and we would have turned it off then. So neither of us could really explain that, and it was pretty strange. But nothing really happened after that, and so we just kind of forgot about it and thought maybe my computer was somehow acting up. However, once we divorced and my ex moved out, this was when things really started to get crazy. My ex took his cats with him, and so it was just me and my dog at the apartment. My dog always slept in the bedroom with me. She never slept out in the living room through the night. I always got the creepy feeling that I was being watched. I never felt 100% at ease while living there alone. I have never smoked cigarettes, and my friend's sister had never smoked cigarettes there, and the smell of stale old cigarettes would always come and go randomly. Normally, I would smell it in the laundry room, but sometimes I'd smell it as soon as I'd walk in the door or in the hallway. I could never explain where the smell was coming from. The hallway in the apartment always felt incredibly creepy. My friend told me that every time she came over there while her sister had lived there, the hallway always gave her the creeps too, but her sister had lived there for 10 years and swears she had never experienced anything there. About 6 months after the divorce, I started dating my current boyfriend. Sometimes he would spend a couple nights over at the apartment with me, because quite frankly, I really didn't like being there alone, and he didn't like the idea of me being there alone. Things had been happening that honestly had me wondering if someone was secretly living in my apartment. I lived in a really bad area, and there were a lot of homeless people around, so maybe one had snuck in. I didn't really have any other explanation. I'd hear things rattling around in the kitchen at night while laying in bed. The most terrifying thing happened while I was in bed alone. I have a Great Dane and she sleeps on her own futon bed which sat at the foot of my bed. She is super laid back, and when she's asleep, she's out nothing's waking her up, especially in the middle of the night while we're both asleep. Well, on this specific night, I woke up to her growling at something. She never does this just randomly in the middle of the night. It was about 2 a.m. She was looking directly into the hallway, and she was super alert, sitting up and baring her teeth. I've literally never seen her do that before. That alone scared me. So I shushed her so I could try to listen, and when she was quiet, I heard the creaking and shuffling of footsteps coming down the hallway from the living room towards my door. I was absolutely shaken with fear. I was fully believing that someone was in my apartment. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I was so terrified I slowly climbed out of bed and grabbed my pistol, which was under my bed. I listened a little more and heard the footsteps proceeding closer, and my dog continued growling. I walked towards my doorway. The door was open, and I hate to say that I fully expected to see someone in my hallway. The person who I suspected had been living in my apartment secretly for months. But as I turned around my doorway, there was absolutely nothing. I was relieved for a minute, but then it hit me to check the rest of my apartment. After finding nothing, I made sure all my windows and front door was locked. They all already were. I think it goes without saying I had quite a lot of trouble sleeping the rest of the night. My boyfriend didn't experience near as much as I did, but he believes me and has had some experiences of his own, randomly waking up in an absolute panic in the middle of the night for no reason, with the feeling of absolute dread, like something is in the room with you. It all came full circle when one night I heard what sounded like the silverware drawer opening suddenly and then slamming shut while in bed with my boyfriend. I didn't even get up to check and see what it was. At this point, we were really just trying to ignore everything. However, that morning I was going down to the first floor to get my mail. I lived above a restaurant and I was friendly with the owner, but we never really spoke much. I happened to run into him, and we started small talk and I told him I was moving. He said, "Wow, really?" And then he asked if I had ever experienced anything while living there. At first I thought he meant just with people in the alley harassing me, and I said, "Well, sure, people go through my trash sometimes." And he stopped me and said, "No, I mean things you can't explain happening in the apartment?" And my face went white. And I told him as a matter of fact yes, and I asked why he was wondering. He told me that he had customers and employees who had experienced things and that they had seen apparitions in the restaurant. He said he had experienced things like cans of food flying off of shelves and just the really heavy, eerie feeling of being watched. He also told me that apparently the tenant who had previously lived in the apartment, which was in the same building as mine in the front, had mentioned to him that he had used an Ouija board in his apartment once. The owner of the restaurant had a self-proclaimed medium come to get a reading of the building. She said she felt energy vortexes in its basement. I don't know what that means, but to be honest, hearing all of that was a lot, because I had spent so long just trying to shrug off everything that had been happening and just ignore it all. But hearing this made me realize maybe it wasn't all just in my head. The last thing I remember experiencing was one night when my boyfriend and I were getting ready for bed. I was already in bed and he was brushing his teeth in the bathroom down the hall. My dog was coming into the bedroom to get onto her bed, and I said goodnight to her. My boyfriend came into the bedroom and asked, "Who were you talking to?" I told him I had just said goodnight to the dog. He said he was asking because he thought I was on the phone because he heard goodnight said out loud twice. I told him I only said it once. Thankfully, I moved out shortly after. When I was 23, I lived in a haunted apartment. It was actually confirmed by the landlord that it was haunted when I was signing the lease, but I didn't actually believe her because I didn't believe in ghosts until this turning point in my life. When I went and toured the apartment, we went to the basement where the laundry was, and we both looked at one another because it felt like someone was walking behind us, and we heard footsteps. She turned to me and said, "Do you hear that?" I responded jokingly to her, "Maybe it's a ghost." And she looked at me dead ass and was like, "This place is haunted." I didn't believe in ghosts at the time, so I was like, "Yeah, whatever," and signed the lease on the washing machine. We never figured out what the footsteps were and why it felt like someone was following us. Fast forward, I move in. I think it's important to note this was an old New England building that went through many uses from its conception in the 1900s, including being a hospital at one point. I didn't bother to look up any of this until I moved out. From the first week I move in, every night at 3 a.m. it sounds like a big heavy-set man rams himself against my front door. Every night, at 3 a.m. on the dot. It scared me at first. Then when I realized it, it was an every night thing and nothing happened other than the slamming. I thought somebody was messing with me or didn't want me in the apartment. So after 2 weeks of this happening, I stayed up and waited at the door so I could look through the peephole and see who this was. I also had a bat just in case, but the important thing to note is I never felt threatened here, even with the banging. I had this sense that I was safe. So I stay up and 3 a.m. hits and I'm looking out the peephole trying to see who's messing with me every night. I was on the second floor, and it was old and creaky, and I could hear everybody walking up and down the hallway and stairs. Like when somebody entered the hallway, I could hear all the way up until they got to my door. I never heard footsteps with this. So anyways, I wait up and 3 a.m. hits, and nothing happens. I'm staring out the peephole and see and hear nothing. So after like 5 minutes, I give up and walk away. I only take 3 steps away from the door and boom, bang against my door again. Sounds like a man with a running start slamming into my metal door once. I run over and look out the peephole and no one's there. After that, I kinda gave up and accepted it. Again, it never felt threatening to me past the initial first few days. At least there, it was not threatening. I believe there were multiple ghosts, we will get to that. It happened every night for a year, and eventually I did sleep through it. Although I woke up right at 3 a.m. every night, right after it would happen, I believe. So anyways, I live my life. I'm not home a lot for half of the year because I'm at work or out. Then the pandemic hits and we all get moved remote. So I start spending more time at home and started notice things. I don't drink or smoke or sleepwalk. Some nights I would go to bed and I would wake up and all the doors and drawers of the kitchen cabinets would be wide open. I definitely never did that, and I barely cooked at the time, so never was in the kitchen. This was before cameras were normal in your house, otherwise I would have put some up. Now in the meantime, I never do my laundry, because when I go down to the basement I feel scared. Like very scared. Not like when I'm up in my apartment and feel indifferent. I could never do my laundry because it felt so wrong to put my back to the door to load clothes, and I felt like someone was watching me and about to come up and touch my back. I honestly believe I had a vision where I looked at the door quickly and saw a sickly-looking blonde man in the doorway in overalls who was gone when I looked away. This was where I signed the lease at the beginning, remember? Not to mention you had to walk through the boiler room and empty bike room in the basement with old bikes to get to the laundry room. And I swore sometimes when I would walk through the bikes in the basement, I would see old flat tires spinning. Anyways, I barely go down there because I can't stand it and feel faint, and ended up stopping going at all. And just doing my laundry at my parents' house 30 minutes away because of the feeling. But also one time I went down and everyone's wet laundry was strewn all over the floor with all the washers thrown wide open. It could have been a crazy neighbor, but didn't seem like it. It always felt threatening. That and the vision was enough. We all had storage rooms that came with our units with our own locks that we bought in the basement as well. One day the cops come because someone broke into all our storage. But the weird thing was all the locks were just open. They weren't picked and they weren't broken. Almost like they all just popped open at once. And we all had different locks bought at different times. The craziest part is nothing was stolen. The cops were bewildered. So anyways, I'm spending a lot more time at home and I notice things are weird. Like my TV turns on and off all the time throughout the day randomly. I changed the batteries in the remote itself. I still have the same TV and it never done that since. Things start going missing. I lose jewelry and find it in strange places like the necklace in the oven months later that I did not put there, but it never bothers me. I honestly slept very well in my unit. But again, I couldn't go in the basement. I literally felt sick, but felt very safe in my unit, oddly. So I start dating someone and we start social distancing together, and he starts sleeping at my place. He started telling me things I've never noticed before. He were way lighter of a sleeper. So he told me when I would be asleep, he would wake up around 3 a.m. to things on my coffee table being moved around. Like slowly pushed from side to side my candles and things. I'm ADHD and messy, so I would just chalk it up to my own doing. But I would always wonder if things would be in different places when I woke up in the morning, so it was nice to know it wasn't me. One time he said my record player that was sitting on my floor unplugged, clicked on, glowed power on, pin was placed, and the record started turning with no sound. He refused to stay over again after that. During my whole lease, I also heard my upstairs neighbor quite a bit. They would have heavy footsteps going back and forth in the night, always past 3 a.m. I chalked it up to them either being an insomniac or working a strange schedule. Again, I was always up at this time because I would just wake up. When it was time to move out, my landlord asked me if I had any complaints before I left. This was a family-owned place, so she came to me in person to say goodbye. I said, slightly joking, the tenant above me has a heavy foot and odd sleeping schedule. She looked at me confused and said, no one's lived in that unit for 2 years because it has damage. I'm lucky because I had only been there the past year. No one had lived up there. Whose footsteps was I hearing? And then I moved out. And I've never had any experiences like that again. It definitely made me believe in spirits, ghosts, and the unexplainable. The feelings I would get can't be explained, and I've talked too much already. At the time, I was into crystals and things like that, and I believe they had either a part in protecting me or inviting them in, not sure. However, it was really interesting to feel the parallels between experiences. To this day, I think there's an evil blonde male ghost in overalls haunting the basement. So this happened quite a few years ago now, but thought I'd try to cobble together the details as best I can, because I have no answer for what happened. I've never been one to believe or disbelieve in ghosts. I always thought of that, until I have an experience where I see something I would believe, but until then, I'll reserve judgment. At this point, and after what happened to me, I can't say for sure what to believe in, but I can say that I'm a lot more open to the idea of ghosts. Now a little backstory. The building I was living in had 4 rooms, 2 on the first floor, 1 on the second, and 1 on the third. I was living on the first floor with the other apartment on the first occupied, and the third floor being occupied as well. The only room that was empty was the second floor, as my tenants had just left a couple weeks earlier, and renovations were about to start up there. This happened around November of 2011 to 12. Can't be certain about the year. I was living in an apartment complex that I own, and occupied one of the smaller rooms on the first floor, and finally had a day off. At the time, I was working 2 jobs that afforded me little to no free time. So I rented a couple movies to watch at home that evening, bought some food to make, and was ready to settle in. Watched my first movie with nothing much happening and thought I had the energy to sneak in a second flick before I settled in for the night. This is where things started to get a little weird. I hit play on my movie and laid back down on the couch with the cats. About 20 minutes in, I started to hear some bumping above my head, so I stopped the movie. As soon as I hit pause, the noise seemed to stop, so I thought nothing of it, so hit play again. Maybe 5 minutes later, the bump started again. Now this time I was quicker on the pause button in hopes of hearing what was going on. This time I was a little more fortunate and heard what I thought was footsteps above my head. I'm very much confused because the room was supposed to be empty. I decided to open the door of my suite and see if there was any light coming from upstairs. Nothing. When I walked back into my living room, the noises had stopped, so I figured maybe it was just the house settling as we were heading into a colder time of the year. I hit play on the movie and again, and not much sooner as I settled back into the couch did the noise start again. This time I paused and heard footsteps above my head clear as day. They moved from my kitchen to above my head, over to my bedroom, and then over top the other room on the first floor. This time I was really worried, because if somebody was in that room, something had to be done about it, and that had to be done by me. I decided that I would take a knife and my phone with me and have 911 pre-dialed. I walked up the stairs and then to the door of the second floor apartment. As soon as I opened the door, it creaked and squealed louder than ever before. Well, at least it felt that way, and I walked into the apartment. The first thing I did was call out in hopes that whoever was there would just give it up and walk out peacefully. "Hey, I know there's somebody up here." "Nothing." "Look, if you just leave now, I won't call the cops. All I want is to empty out the room, no trouble needed." "Still nothing." "All right, here's the deal. I'm coming through, and if I find you, I have 911 on my phone ready to go, so don't do anything stupid." Of course, I get no response, so I get to searching. Check the living room and first bedroom, nobody there. The kitchen and bathroom, nothing. The last of the bedrooms, nobody. Completely defeated, slightly freaked but probably more relieved, I closed the loudest door in the world and walked back into my apartment. I sat on the couch and listened for what was probably 5 minutes but felt like 20 and decided that I was hearing things, so let's just leave it at that. Finish my movie and then get a good night's sleep. Yeah, that wasn't about to happen. Start up the movie again, and of course, minutes later the noises start up again. This time the footsteps are going in reverse, starting above the other apartment, over my bedroom, then over to my living room, and ending at my kitchen. This time I'm just mad because I've clearly missed somebody squatting in my house. I grab my knife, my phone, and start stomping my way back up to the second floor. Open the door. It creaks like no tomorrow. Then I turn on the lights on in the suite again. Alright, whoever this is, I'm pissed. I have a knife and I'm not afraid to use it. I have my phone and have 911 dialed up and ready for me to hit send. All I want is you out, so just admit you're here and we can end this. No response. Fine, I'm coming in. Don't expect any sympathy. I searched and searched every square inch of that floor, and to my chagrin, I found diddly squat. Hell, I opened the windows in hopes of finding somebody out on a ledge or something, but still I found no trace of anybody or anything. Now I'm a little freaked out because I know what I heard. Still, I can't stay up there, so I make my way back down, but not before closing the door and this time locking it to make sure nobody could get in. So back into my apartment and thoroughly confused, I just kind of decided that if I put it behind me, nothing will happen. So I start up the movie for the umpteenth time. 5 minutes go by and nothing happens. Another 10 minutes and still nothing. It's now to the point where I actually believe nothing is going to happen, so I finally settle back in. And that was my mistake. No sooner than I start to relax, the footsteps start up again. Starting in my kitchen then over my living room, but this time they stopped there and moved in a different direction. This time heading towards the door of the apartment into the common area stairs. Suddenly the pounding of the feet are on the stairs, but I didn't hear the door open. The loudest door in the universe somehow didn't make a peep opening or closing. Now I'm freaked out. I slowly, and as quietly as possible, move over to my door to make sure it's locked and started to listen with my ear to the door. The steps were now just outside my door and heading towards the door that goes outside. I thought for just a moment maybe this guy had decided that he wanted to leave me be and go away. Instead, they just continued, but this time, down into the basement. It was at this point that I was both sweating buckets but cold as ice. What was happening just seemed to be impossible, but I knew one thing. If there was somebody in the building, they had just cornered themselves down in the basement that was essentially just an empty square with nowhere to hide, besides maybe behind the washing machine. So because I'm dumb, I actually have to be the responsible landlord and do my job. I need to grit my teeth and make one last attempt to figure out just what the hell is going on. So I open my door to an empty and pitch black common area and make my way down to the basement. And yes, in hindsight, that is the cliche horror movie move. The first thing I noticed was that the basement was completely dark, no light on, which was both confusing and absolutely terrifying. So in one last-ditch attempt, I called down the stairs to whomever was down there to just please end this and head out this door and call it a night. Of course, there was no answer, and I resigned myself to having to go down and investigate. Once I got there, it was obvious there was nobody there. It's an unfinished basement with only a washer and dryer and not much else besides pipes. So after the most pointless investigation, I run back upstairs as fast as I can, slam and lock my door and just stand there. Bewildered, I can do nothing. I have spent the bulk of my evening chasing down somebody that doesn't exist. Then the footsteps started again, and I was ready. I stood at my door and waited. I heard the steps passing by my door and towards the stairs that lead back up the second floor room. Now I've lived there long enough to know that there are 15 steps before you get to a landing and out of sight of the door of my room. So my plan was to wait until they were halfway up the stairs and catch whoever was in my house. First step, second step. Third and fourth. I start sweating and my heart is racing. Fifth step. I can't believe what has happened to my night. Sixth step. One more and I can put to rest what has happened. Seventh step. I power through my door and hit the light switch beside the door for the common area, and to my bewilderment, the steps were completely barren. There was nobody there. The lights upstairs and down were off, and I was just standing in my doorframe, basically unable to move. Pins and needles running down my back and legs as I stare into nothing. After a minute, my brain seemed to finally catch up to my body, or vice versa. Couldn't tell you which wasn't functioning at this point, and I panic. I spin around and slam my door, lock it, and run as fast as a human can to my bed. I went full-on 5-year-old mode, head under the blanket and terrified. My cats are now sleeping on the bed with me as they always do, and I just sit there in the silence of my house, alone with just my thoughts. I just sat there trying to process what just happened. Then the footsteps started up again. They moved one step at a time down the stairs this time and onto the landing on the first floor. As they approached my door, they just stopped. The steps just stopped at my door and there was nothing I could do about it. I sat in my bed waiting for something, anything to happen. It was excruciating. Then, knock, knock, knock. The loudest knock at my door and I just sat there stunned, unable to move and sweating like I'd just run a marathon. I don't know why I did what I did next, but I needed to open my door. It made no sense, but my door needed to be opened. So I put on my house coat and walked over to the door, maybe 15 paces away from where I was laying down. Hand shaking, I unlocked the handle and slowly turned the knob and swung open the door to see. Nobody, not a soul was standing at the door. No more noises, no more lights on, and no more second floor door opening that night. Nothing. I closed the door and got back into bed and just sat there for ages waiting for what was going to happen next. But that was it. I never heard another footstep that night or any other night after that. Over the next couple of days, I told the story to my mom and dad. My mom was terrified as she would be for her son. My dad decided to do some research into the house and it turned out there was a history in the home. First, in the 80s, there was a fire on the second floor that killed 3 people. And then again in the 90s, there was 2 more deaths. Apparently a husband came home early to find his wife and another man in their bed. He stabbed them both to death. After that night, I asked the other tenants about that night, and it turned out both had been out of town. One just outside of city limits, and the other was in a completely different province. The story begins in 2019 when we bought a new apartment. The place was previously owned by an old couple. The old man had passed away in that flat, and his wife, who was a very pious and religious woman, was living there. She sold the flat to us at a very low price. We moved in, and initially everything was fine. During that period of my life, I was in a bad place mentally. I had just broken up with my ex. The flat was more like a spare place for us. So during COVID lockdowns, I used to go there alone and chill. I would turn off all the lights and play on my PlayStation for hours. But strange things started happening. Sometimes the room would suddenly feel very cold. I would feel extremely heavy. And sometimes I felt like tables and chairs were moving in the other room. I always tried to rationalize it by thinking maybe it was noise from upstairs neighbors. Still, I used to feel this strange fear. Sometimes I would suddenly save my game, grab my keys, and run out of there as fast as I could. One major incident happened late one night. The flat had 3 rooms: my parents' room, my room, and a spare guest room. The living room overlooked the dining space where the fridge was, right beside the kitchen. One night around 1:30 a.m., I was sitting on the window ledge. The lights were off and only a small candle lamp was lit. Outside was an empty lane with yellow streetlights. There was not a single person outside. Then I saw a shadowy figure inside my room. I am quite a skeptic person, so I first thought maybe it was the shadow of someone walking outside under the streetlight, but I was sitting right next to the window. I looked out. Nobody was there. When I looked back inside, the shadow was gone. Then suddenly my mother started banging on my door, telling me to come out and sleep in their room. I was confused and said I was fine, but she insisted, so I grabbed my phone and went to their room and slept there. The next morning, I asked her what happened. She said she would tell me after we returned to our main house. When we got back, she told me that the previous night she was lying on the sofa, using her phone. She saw a shadowy, human-like figure standing beside the fridge, staring at her. She thought it was my father and asked him to bring her a glass of water. The figure kept staring. When she shouted my father's name loudly, the figure suddenly ran into the kitchen. She followed it, but nobody was in the kitchen. Then she checked the bedroom and found my father sleeping. That's when she got terrified and came running to my room, banging on my door. Even after that, I didn't stop going there because my PlayStation and entire gaming setup were there. But I started going only in the mornings and leaving before noon. I always felt scared for no clear reason. A few months later, I started feeling very heavy and dizzy whenever I stayed there too long. I thought it was because of long gaming sessions. One day my ex-girlfriend came over. We were watching a movie with the lights off, drinking Coke or Pepsi in glasses. Suddenly, one glass fell off the shelf and shattered everywhere. I turned on the lights, cleaned it up, and went to the washroom. When I came back, we hugged. And as we were about to sit on the bed, we saw small paper pins scattered all over the bed. Those pins were normally kept in my parents' room on a shelf. Somehow they were now on my bed and we were just about to lie there. Then we heard tables and chairs moving in the dining room, like someone was dragging the furniture. My ex got extremely scared and insisted we leave immediately. I walked her home and then went back to my parents' place. Soon my mother and I told the entire chain of events to my maternal grandmother, who is very religious. She contacted a priest she knew. He gave her something blessed and told her to hide it somewhere deep in the house. We also performed a small cleansing ritual. While burning cleansing materials in a bowl, my grandmother asked me to hold the bowl and place it exactly where I had first seen the shadow. The moment I placed it there, I felt extremely dizzy, like my head was spinning 360 degrees, and then suddenly I felt normal again. After that, the house felt very light. Even today, sometimes I feel a little eerie there, but that heavy feeling is gone. I think whatever was there has left. Maybe it found salvation.